Hey.
Hey.
How's it going?
Well, it's going. Long day, but you know.
Yeah, very long day it feels like. All right, let's do this. So we forgot to, well, I don't even know if we forgot, we just kind of didn't have time. I've been super slammed lately. Who is going to introduce Kat?
I have her bio. I mean,
Okay.
pulled up.
Yeah, I mean, I can pull it up too, but yeah. If you want to do it, yeah.
You know how to say her last name?
Ooh, no. If she joins the waiting room in a second here, let's ask.
Okay.
It sounds Greek, so I feel like I know how to say it. Trataris, but
that's how I would say it too.
Yeah, we'll have to ask. Oh, I'm trying to like not show that I haven't had time to clean my room. Maybe if I tilt the camera up a little bit. There we go.
There's like a huge reflection on my TV, but whatever.
Oh yeah, it's something like my lamp is going to be glaring behind me if I move my head, but oh well. People can deal. My laptop is too old to do a virtual background. So.
I mean, I guess I could do a virtual background. Let me see here.
Self on the beach.
Right?
Oh, I wish.
Relaxing. That'd be different.
What's that like?
Exactly.
We were filming a project for Untapped Cities. Do you know that website?
No.
It's kind of like Atlas Obscura or Time Out, where they focus on like different sort of niche things. So we're doing a feature on our women in historic preservation exhibit for Women's History Month. Yeah. And they first told us that there was nothing left for Women's History Month. And then they're like, oh, surprise, we actually have a spot for the 30th. And you want to do a presentation? And I was like, yeah, that's a week. Okay.
Sure. Why not?
Yeah. Ooh, you're like in heaven right now.
Right? It's kind of, I don't know if I like that, but maybe.
Ooh, the bricks, that's nice. That looks good.
Kind of like that.
Yeah,
I might go with that.
That's a good one. I like it.
All right, there we go. I gotta see the glare on my TV tonight. I feel like today is a Monday that just hasn't ended. Like, I just feel like.
Oh my God, yeah. You're very spot on. Yep. All right, so I have the grant pulled, or the slideshow pulled up. Unless you want to do it, it doesn't matter to me.
No, you can. That's fine.
Okay. I mean, we didn't really practice this one, but the other one, like, we didn't really need to practice that much, so I think we're all right.
Yeah, I feel the same. Like, I feel like we both know it. It's like, fine, we'll just riff off each other. And if worse comes to worse, we can just let Kat talk longer.
Yeah. I mean, last time we went overtime, so I think we're going to be okay.
Yeah. Do you know how the whole payment system works? Of like paying Kat?
No, who isn't? I would think Chloe, because she's the treasurer, pays her.
Okay.
I don't know if we have required like an invoice from speakers in the past, though. I haven't been on that. I think who was doing the Skillshare? Was that Jessie? Maybe she knows.
I think it's Laura. I'll ask Laura.
Oh yeah, it was Laura.
Because I don't know, like, do we need to gather all the information, or does she does Kat just send it to Chloe? I don't know the process. So.
Yeah, I mean, on our end, we definitely need to like have some sort of record of why we paid her, but we don't need to do like a 1099. So it should be okay. Do you have an example grant that you wanted to show or anything?
Not tonight. I felt like there was a lot to cover plus a speaker, so I didn't want to get too in the weeds since it's only an hour.
Yeah. Because I had a state government grant that we successfully got for the first time in a while because they're really sort of a bitch about it.
Yeah.
Recently that I thought if we needed an example we could pull up, but yeah, I don't think we're going to be short on time. But just because when I wanted to talk about the sexy words, I thought maybe it would be useful to have an example. Maybe I think maybe I will pull this up to talk about that if we have time. If not, we'll let it be. Can you talk about the letter of inquiry? Because actually most of the grants that I have done have not needed one of those, so I don't have as much chops with that, I bet, as you do.
Yeah, no problem. Okay. So I'll start with that. What is BG?
Like the background info that we need to like like the spiel about your institution, that kind of thing. Okay. Kind of like just that section's a little bit of a refresher from last time. So.
Yeah.
I think the LOI is the only thing that we didn't really talk about. Okay. No, I wish it would stay in presentation mode even when I make it not full screen. Stupid Mac makes it smart. Probably is. But we need to rub it in. Okay.
I wonder how many people are going to tune in tonight.
Yeah, I think we had 320 people signed up. So I'm assuming we'll get like 40.
Right.
Yeah, if everybody's having a week like I'm having, I would take a nap instead and watch the
recording. Yep. I feel like by the time I get done with this week, come Sunday night, I'm just going to need to take Monday off. Like, it's going to be so...
And a friend of mine invited me to a beach in New Jersey on Saturday, and she's like, "You want to come over Friday night? Like, we'll watch a movie and have wine." And I'm like, "No, I gotta work. I got too much to do."
Yep.
On the train to meet her, I'm probably gonna be doing work. It's only like an hour, but still, I'm all vaccinated, so I can do stuff.
Oh, that's good. Yeah. I get my first shot tomorrow.
Nice. Looking forward to it. Are your kids vaccinated?
No. Nope. Right now, it's no one under the age of 16 can get it. So.
Okay, I haven't really been paying attention to the age stuff because everybody that I know qualified for comorbidities. But I would have thought that if people were doing in-person school, it would have gone from like oldest and youngest at the same time and then sort of like met in the middle of it.
Yeah, apparently there's no vaccine approved for children at the moment.
Oh.
So I know Pfizer just started some trials for children, but
wow,
yeah,
it must be hard to do that because they're not consent age.
Yeah, I think they're supposed to have a vaccine for children possibly in a year.
Wow, oh my God. All right, here's Kat. Hi, Kat.
Hey. Hi, Kat.
All right. So I think Cassandra's going to introduce you, but we wanted to make sure that we're pronouncing your last name correctly.
Yeah, it's Tritaris.
Ah, we got it. All right.
You're right. Okay.
It's the simpler version than people try to make it often.
I love the art in the background. Very cool.
Thanks. I'm house sitting, but you know, one can dream.
Yeah. It looks very like artistic and scholarly all at once and very nice.
Yeah. It's actually a lesbian porn collection.
Even better. All right. Do you think we can start letting folks in?
I'm ready.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm gonna hit the admit button. I'm sure a lot of people will be joining as things near 8 o'clock. Already got a good crowd here. Good evening, everybody.
Hey.
We're going to just have a few minutes to chat while we let people get logged in. We'll start maybe just a few minutes after 8 p.m. We were just talking about that it feels like it's been a very long week, so I hope that those of you tuning in have had a more relaxing time. I don't know, it's one of those weeks, maybe for everybody.
There's a lot of activity and it's both exciting and intense.
Yeah, well, it's facts. All right. More people in the waiting room. Okay. Great. Linda, can you hear me? Oh, okay. I saw that it was giving you those dots for a while. Glad it connected for you. All right. It started in.
See how much I bring home? You need any cook set for a while? Why you don't buy so much? $15 for all of them. Just collect the water.
Tomorrow is Friday. I hope everybody has a nice day lined up for tomorrow. Thank you so much for taking time out of your day to join us tonight. I'm seeing a lot of names I don't recall seeing from the last class. Was anybody here for the 101 on grants writing? No. Leslie, you were here?
I was
Great,
not.
thanks so much. All right, well, welcome to this one. You definitely don't need to have attended the previous one to get something out of this one, especially if you're a little more seasoned grant writer, you're in the right spot. And this is going to have slides, so but for the most part, we'll be saying everything out loud as well. So if you're joining us by phone, you shouldn't miss anything, but we're also going to have the recording made available on our website just a little bit after this is done. We have some time to edit the video, so you'll be able to watch it again if there's anything that you think you missed if you're joining us by phone, or just if something comes up, you'll be able to access the information again. All right, it's 8 o'clock on the dot. We've got a good crowd going. I think maybe we will wait just a few more minutes because a whole slew of people just entered the waiting room. I think a few people are going to be logging in. Oh, I had a dream last night that I got the world's worst haircut, and I was like, oh no, I have to do this class. Really could use a haircut. I guess a lot of us are in our quarantine long hair.
That's for
in
sure.
The summer, yeah. Yours is usually shorter, right, Cassandra?
Usually, yeah.
Yeah.
The revival of the 60s.
All right, we'll just give maybe one more minute and then we can go ahead and get started. Okay.
Got a good crowd tonight. Awesome.
Yeah, exciting to see so many people here to learn about grants. Woo. Get that money.
It's very exciting, the idea of getting what you need.
Yeah. All right, well, we're at a nice round 50 participants right now, so maybe we can go ahead and get started, and I'll be monitoring the waiting room in case there's any other folks who join us in a little bit. Oh, Speaking of which, another person just joined. Welcome, welcome. And I'm going to share my screen. Let's see. Go. All right, I think everybody should be able to see that. Putting him up in the corner. All righty. Can everybody just give me a nod or a wave if they're able to see the screen?
Yeah.
Good stuff. Okay, thanks everybody. All right, so we're going to be going through this presentation tonight, and we only have about an hour. I know last class ran a little bit long, so you know, if the Q&A runs over, I think we're all right. Obviously, as our guest Kat, if you need to peace out earlier than that, no, totally understand, but I'll stick around. Alrighty, so we're gonna get started. If everybody doesn't mind muting themselves, if you think you're gonna have some background noise, we're gonna go through the presentation. And if you have any questions that are super prescient to what we're talking about, I suppose I don't mind if you unmute yourself to ask them, but it might be better to wait at the end because we have a lot of material to go through, and maybe we'll already plan to answer your question a little bit later on in the presentation where we thought that material made sense. And we're definitely going to have some time for Q&A at the end. And we're also going to want your feedback about what we should talk about in the 300 level course. So thank you again for joining us. My name is Kelsey Bro. I am the Northeastern Regional Director for NEMPN, the National Emerging Museum Professionals Network, and I'm the Executive Director at King Manor, which is a historic house museum near JFK Airport in Queens, New York, home to anti-slavery founding father Rufus King. And I'm joined by the lovely Cassandra.
Hi, everyone. My name is Cassandra Cavness, and I am the Development Assistant for the Montgomery Museum of Fine Arts in Montgomery, Alabama. A development assistant really just is a fancy way or a government way of saying grant writer. I am the sole grant writer at my museum. And I am also on the National Emerging Museum Professional Network Board. I am the Regional Southeast Director. And we are joined tonight by our guest, Kat Trataris. Kat Trataris is a queer non-binary artist, curator, and art worker who facilitates creative visions for artistic inquiries, public programs, community projects, and archive research-based work through the development of institutional partnerships, grant writing, donor relations, fundraising, and business consultation. As the founder of Unrestricted Funds, they are dedicated to developing lasting change for racial and social equity through greater access to resources and funding. And so we are so happy to have Kat with us tonight.
I hear somebody's got some background noise, so if you wouldn't mind just muting yourselves for right now, I'd really appreciate it. And with that, let's go ahead and get started. So thank you so much again for being here with us tonight. Kat and Cassandra and Kelsey. Oh, that's a nice alliteration there. We are going to have a really good time talking about grants. So just an overview of what we're going to talk about tonight. We'll do a little bit of a review from last time, talk about different components you might see when you look at a grant proposal. We'll talk about budgeting, because I know that's a skill a lot of people are looking to hone or develop. And then Kat is going to speak with us about their work. And we're going to have some more tips to follow up and kind of wrap things up with about how to make your proposal the most effective it can be. And then we want to hear from you, any of your comments, questions, observations. Can't wait to hear from all of you. So again, thanks for being here, and take it away, Cassandra.
Thanks, Kelsey. So last time we met for Grants 101, we did not talk about an LOI. And tonight we're going to discuss it a little bit. So an LOI basically is a letter of interest or a letter of intent. And basically it's kind of like a cover letter you would write for a job, right? So typically businesses want you to say what your skills are, what your strengths are, and highlight accomplishments in your cover letter, right? That's basically the same thing that you're doing for an LOI when you write to a grantor, is you're explaining what your idea is, why is it important, and highlighting some of the great things that your organization has done in the past. So it's a very, very condensed version, kind of like kind of like an abstract mixed with your organizational profile put together that you send to a grantor to see if they're interested. Now, some grantors require it. For instance, we have a grantor here in Alabama, the Daniel Foundation. They require you to send in your LOI and they'll review that. And if they like what they see, then they invite you to apply. I know that the W.K. Kellogg Foundation is the same way, which is a much larger national grant, international actually. And so sometimes the grantors will require that of you. Other times it's good to just write your LOI because it gives you a chance to kind of pack in one document the reason why you're doing it. So that way, if you have a conversation with, say, a program analyst, because you have questions about the grant process or whatever, you'll have that kind of to read from and to refer to when talking in conversation with them. So that way you're a little bit more prepared for it. But LOIs are not all that common for grants, but they are there. So we just wanted to make sure you guys understood what they were.
Yeah, and many times, like Cassandra said, it is something that you'll have to submit in advance to see if the granting organization wants you to actually do a full proposal, if it's going to be a good fit. So it's nice because it can kind of save you a lot of time. If you don't seem like a good fit, then the organization is not going to want you to waste your time writing all these other things like the following bullet points. But then other times it'll be smaller. They might not even call it an LOI, but you can think of it. Or if you have other LOIs that you can tweak, you can use it as like a prospectus or an abstract. So if you've ever written an academic paper, you know, those can be kind of challenging, but it's, you know, you have to have your whole background of your institution and your project in one small area. But if any of you have done exhibit writing, you already know how to condense stuff. So you can use that skill in writing your grants and especially your LOI component. Then the other information that you're going to want to have is the background info. And it's good to have a document. I like to host everything on Google Docs so that it can, you know, wherever your workspace is, you have it. Because they're going to want to, I don't think I've ever seen a grant application that wasn't like, provide an overview of your institution and its main programs and the audience that you serve. Provide an overview of the project that you're looking to get funded, that sort of thing. Oh, and we also talked last time too about you're going to want to have your information about your institutional budget and your corporate, government, and foundation supporters that already exist, either for your institution as a whole, because they might ask for that, or if you have any funds already allocated toward this project, whether that's in kind, or it's, you know, you're trying to get funding from a few different sources and you already have some that's been allocated.
Yeah, so then once you've gotten your LOI done, they've asked you to do your proposal, you've gotten your background information together and written, the next part is your narrative. And your narrative is really the meat of your proposal. It is where you're going to explain your project in greater detail. You're going to put in who is going to be on the project, what is their role going to be. Oftentimes you're going to put in what are your expected outcomes, what are your evaluation methods, what are your expected challenges, and what are your mitigation strategies for that. So all of this kind of goes into the narrative. And not every grant is going to require all of that. Now, federal grants, yes, they will require all of that. Smaller institutional grants, foundation grants, some state grants will not require all of it, but it's still a good idea to understand what will be asked at larger types of funding organizations, so that way you're prepared if you decide you are ready to apply for a federal grant.
Yeah, and if you're looking at a foundation grant or maybe even a state grant, it would probably be good to know if you have institutional history of getting support from them, because then you can always thank them for their past support, because they're maybe going to be more likely to support you in the future, knowing that they made a good decision in the past to do so, or at least hopefully they considered it a good decision. You definitely want to make sure that, you know, if your maybe predecessor wrote a grant, got the grant, and then didn't really follow up properly, that you speak to them about that. So it's it's a bit unfortunate if you don't have good record keeping in your institution, which if you're at a small museum like the ones I have worked in, is not going to be the case.
Yes, that is very true. Oftentimes, record keeping isn't the best in a lot of situations. But like Kelsey said, if you keep everything in a Google Drive, then you don't have the chance of losing it if your hard drive crashes or something like that. And then, of course, you can always print it and keep a hard copy as well. But it's very, very important to know whether or not you've had support from that grantor before, because that, in their mind, will allow them to know that you're going to be fiscally responsible with the money that they give you, and that they've supported you in the past, so they're more likely, in most cases, to be willing to lend again if you were successful in completing the projects that you said you were going to complete.
Yeah, and I think we're sort of at a time where maybe our predecessors had something on a backup drive, but it wasn't in the cloud, and now that backup drive is an outdated format, or they used WordPerfect, which you can't access those files easily anymore, or maybe they printed out a copy, but there's like 17 million binders and file folders in your office, and you didn't even know that there was a copy of this particular grant because you had no idea to look for it. Not, just speaking for a friend. So you can also, as we mentioned in the first one, email or call them. They don't want to have their time wasted by reading some bad grant application, and you don't want to waste your time by submitting a grant application that they're not going to like. So don't be afraid to ask them. It's not going to make you sound like an idiot. As I mentioned in the previous one, I was nervous to ask the first time I was asked to write a grant because I thought, oh no, if I ask questions, they're going to think I don't know what I'm doing, and they're not going to want to give me the money. But they really do want to give you the money. And if you can be as clear as possible, they're really going to like that. So you can definitely ask them clarifying questions. They might have time periods where like the call for papers has been, or grants has been out for a while, so they're not legally allowed to answer questions at that point. But that's kind of the only instance in which they're not going to be happy to answer your questions.
Exactly. And also there's some foundations out there who hire people specifically to do that. Like that's their job, is to handle the grants and to answer people's questions about the grants. A lot of times if you see a foundation that has like a grant program analyst, that usually means they're there to answer your question. Recently I was talking with one of our grantors, and she said, the thing that we don't like is when people send in cold applications, meaning no one's ever had any contact with them before and they're just submitting a grant. They like to get to know their applicants ahead of time so they can understand them a little bit better, and understand bigger picture and help them to shape their grant in a way that meets the criteria of the grant in a little bit better manner. Because sometimes you might think it's one thing that they're asking for, but when you call and you talk to the people at the foundation or the granting agency, it's actually something else that they want, or it's worded a little bit differently. And so when you have those conversations, it allows you to understand how to write to that specific grant.
Absolutely. I definitely had that situation recently where I was looking at something, I think it was an NEH grant for digitizing or for preservation. And I was like, oh, we could do some digital preservation. And I called them and they're like, oh, no, that's not really like what we mean. Oh, okay. But it was good because then I didn't waste my time writing a grant all about digital preservation, and that wasn't even an eligible expense. So definitely want to ask those questions before you land yourself in a silly situation. So I think that's I don't know, should we talk about budgeting, Cassandra? I think we've covered a lot of this good stuff, and if there's anything you guys think we haven't covered, let's talk about that at the end, or you can put it in the chat. I am monitoring that, but I know a lot of people want to learn about budgeting, so let's move on to that.
Budgeting, this is probably as important as your narrative. When I'm writing a grant, I know that I focus a lot on my narrative to make sure all of my ideas are there and to make sure that it makes sense to the grantor and it's not just something that's kind of stuck in my head. But I also spend a lot of time on the budget. And that's because you have to make sure that your budget is realistic. That's one of the things that will automatically disqualify a grant, is if your budget does not make sense. If you have unallowable expenses in it, or if you have expenses that are above and beyond what the typical asking price of something would be, those are all red flags to people that review grants. And they're often reasons why grants get rejected, is because the budget isn't in line with either the granting criteria or the line items that people have put in there are just not realistic. And so that's why I spend so much time going over and triple checking our budget.
Yeah, budgets can be especially tricky for the federal grants, because even if you are allowed to do staff salaries or what they would consider like personnel expenses, so that would be your health insurance premiums that the museum pays, or even maybe a percentage of the audit, although that's not a benefit, but sometimes they'll say that the salary is allowed, but the benefits aren't allowed. Or if you want to include fringe, then you have to use this government percentage calculator of what that is. And that can actually be quite messy. And to be honest, I usually just don't do that and don't cover the fringe, because I work for a small place, so the fringe isn't particularly expensive. So usually, rather than dealing with that level of oversight, because certain things that you ask for, they're going to scrutinize more. So if you already know that they're going to scrutinize something, maybe spend your time on something that is a little bit easier to explain and is also a bigger ask, right? Because if I'm going to ask for $10,000 and I only need like 300 for the fringe, maybe I can figure out a way to ask for more money for tech supplies or some other more easily calculatable, allowable expense. That's going to be a big hitter. Because I think something that's really frustrating about writing grants in general is that you're going to spend hours to maybe get $8,000 for a lot of grants. So it's kind of like the mid-size range. So you want to have that Google Doc with those other things that you can copy paste and just tweak a little bit. Like you want to hit those big heavy hitting things, and don't futz a little bit like, oh, I need to spend like $12.95 in gas mileage. Like it's not worth your time.
That's very true. And I think people might want to know what an allowable expense is. So an allowable expense, basically what that means is the criteria that the grantor has set forth and says, we will pay for these items. So a lot of times, they'll specifically say, we do not fund, and they'll give you a list. And then with federal grants, they will specifically say, these types of things are allowable. Anything not in those categories is not. So you need to make sure that you're following the guidelines that the grantor is giving you and putting only those types of expenses in your grant. Yes, you might have other expenses for the project, but you cannot put them in the grant to ask money to pay them, because they're not allowable.
Yeah, that said, if they want your project budget and you're doing something where, let's say staff salaries are not an allowable expense, but obviously you need staff to do, let's say, this suitcase education project, and you're trying to ask for money to build out the suitcase and to acquire the touch objects for it, but also you need a facilitator, but that facilitator is not an eligible expense, still put it in your project budget, because they're going to want to see that you're thinking of those things. Because if you make this traveling trunk and you don't have anybody to travel it, why are they going to give you money for it? So just make sure that in your budget, you can make a spreadsheet, and there's a lot of templates online, and maybe we can provide some with the link for this. That'll say like, the project budget, and then this is what you're asking from Foundation X. Because also many times they're only going to say that, that they're going to fund like up to 50% or up to 75%.
Yeah, I was just going to add that that's a good point, that, your total project budget is different than your budget that you're asking for in terms of what you're trying to get the grantor to pay, right? So oftentimes, well, not oftentimes, like 99% of the time, your project budget is going to be much more than what you're asking for. And so they want to see what your project budget is, because they, like Kelsey said, they want to know that you've kind of thought through all of these different areas and that you have them budgeted, but they don't want you to put the unallowable expenses in the grant ask, is what we're trying to say.
Yeah. We had a good question in the chat that I think is perfect for right now. Do grant organizations heavily analyze what you put in your own cost share? What do you think about that, Cassandra? Do grant organizations heavily analyze what you put in your own cost share?
I think they do. I think they still want you to be realistic in what you're putting in your cost share. And oftentimes you still have to justify it because they want to know, like, how do you plan to pay for it, right? And I know, because I've reviewed several federal grants, and I know that was something that I did look at, was like, okay, well, you're saying you need this much, and you're saying that you're bringing this much to the table. What are you bringing to the table by line item? And does that seem to make sense? I don't just look at the overall number that you say you're going to bring. I look at it by category. So, okay, you say you're going to bring staff salaries. Well, okay, does that staff salary amount make sense for the project that you're saying? Because you might be maybe overinflating the amount of time it's going to take on the project, which bumps up your cost share amount, but isn't actually accurate. So in my opinion, I know that I look for those type of things. And I know that other people who review have looked at those things on grants that I've submitted.
Yeah, and I would say also that, well, first of all, you can use in kind for sometimes for these things. So that's not monetary stuff, but if you're going to be like, oh, we're kind of like donating our staff salary or staff time for this. But at the same time, especially if you're like a lower budget institution and you're asking for money to do maybe one of your core projects, but again, let's say staff expenses are not allowable, because unfortunately many times that's the case, they're going to look at your overall budget and say, like, well, where are you getting your money to fund these people? So oftentimes they'll actually even, you should make a note in the budget of, these are the rest of the expenses for the project that are not going to be covered by this ask, and here is where we're getting the money from. Like for my organization, we government grants usually fund a lot of our staff salary, so that's what I would say in my project budget notes.
Yeah, and for like my organization, we're part city and part not, and so the money that comes to us from the city is pretty much all salary. And so our city pays our staff. And so that's what I say. So do we really need to break it down by line item? Well, that really depends on the grant. Some don't need you to. I've actually encountered a few grants where it said, what is the total project budget? And they give you a line or a little space and you put it in there, and that's all they want. But oftentimes, if they do that, they want you to upload a project budget along with that. So I always say, when you're working on a budget, do it by line, because that way you've got it if they need it. And that way, if you get the grant, when you're trying to track expenses, you can make sure that you are actually allocating the money the way you said you needed it, right? So I just use it always, all the time, by line item, just to make sure I'm doing grant expenditures and grant management correctly.
Yeah, sometimes depending on the grant, you can even say like a portion of your utilities or something like that. So don't forget that you can add those to your line items as well, especially if those are something that you can put as your cost share.
That is true. Now let's talk a little bit about justifying expenses. We kind of have hit on this a little bit when we're talking about analyzing grants in terms of what reviewers are looking at. But justifying your expenses is basically saying, this is how we got to this number. So for instance, with federal grants, if you put in your cost share amount for the salary that you're going to pay your staff that's working on this, the justification is, this is how much they make per hour. This is how many hours they're going to be working on it. Therefore, this is the total amount that we're doing as a cost share. Now, to use Kelsey's example earlier, where she talked about needing to hire a consultant, if that is an allowable expense, and you say, we're going to hire a consultant and we're going to pay them, I don't know, $15,000, you have to be able to justify that amount. So not only do you have to justify it in terms of what the standard rate is for that type of work, but also within the industry. So you have to make sure that you're looking at it both ways. And if you're doing a federal grant, they even want you to go so far as to look at the Bureau of Labor Statistics and find similar jobs. So for instance, if you're counting volunteer hours in your max, in your cost share, they're going to want to know what is a typical range for that type of particular work if you were to hire somebody to do that job. So you have to look at the Bureau of Labor Statistics, find a similar job, find the rate of pay, and that is how you justify that expense.
Yeah, and I've also seen, especially for hiring a consultant, even if they want just sort of a stipend number, not an hourly number, they also will want you to say what deliverables you're going to have the consultant give you.
Yes, that's a good point. And oftentimes it helps to bolster your case if the consultant can give you a quote, because it allows the grantor to see like, oh, okay, well, you've been in contact with somebody in the industry. This is not you just kind of making this assumption. It's really going to be an accurate accounting of what that particular person is going to need to be paid.
Absolutely. All right, well, I think that you've heard enough from us for right now, so I'm going to turn it over to Kat.
Hey, everybody. So just a little bit also on how I kind of got involved in grant writing. I have worked in a lot of different jobs in museums and arts organizations, and I started, essentially as an artist, but I was a preparator for a number of years. I ran a gallery space, and then I actually directed one at a museum at a college, and now work as the development manager in a local theater arts organization. So I've come from a place of many ranges of perspective, from handling art to fundraising. And this is kind of where, as I was moving through these positions, really trying to see the access to grant writing as a skill, the access to the ways in which you have to kind of sell yourself or frame your projects or talk about what you're doing in really specific ways that sort of speak and align to the funder or the application itself. And I think this is the question when we're saying what does a grant reviewer look for? We're definitely digging into this thing of well, who is actually reviewing your grant? That's a really big question to consider. Is it a jury of essentially peers? So other people who are in organizations? Is it literally just an individual who is a funder who is looking to give money away? Is it a panel from a museum? So those kinds of questions can also help you to understand the type of language or the way to communicate yourself. And in these two questions I'm sort of presenting here, it's kind of is before you even start working on a grant, is it actually the right grant? Because I think a lot of people, including artists, really want to see every opportunity as being an opportunity that suits them. But many opportunities, if they are saying things like, we want you to be educating children, trying to make the argument that like your exhibition is also educating children when really your main operation is to showcase art is going to put you in a position of most likely not being accepted, and not because your idea isn't good, but because you're not actually a match for the mission or the vision of the grant or the funder. So I always like to really encourage people to do like a quick self-check, because there is actually a lot of opportunities out there, and like finding the ones that best match you are a really good way to start off in like a successful path forward. Another thing is essentially like read the grant application at least 3 times before actually working on it. And this seems like a very grueling and ridiculous task, but I would say that there are a lot of grants are essentially a very convoluted way of communicating. It's not very conversational. You're trying to essentially like fit a lot of concept into a word count. I mean, it's a very rigid system for the most part. And so being really familiar with the questions, especially because oftentimes it feels like you're being asked to repeat yourself pretty consistently throughout an application, having like a really comfortable sense of what the application is asking of you and when it's asking it of you can allow you to like take that opportunity where it feels like you're repeating yourself to actually expand. So it's like, who are you serving? And then it's like, who is benefiting? It kind of sounds and is sort of the same question, but the benefit is essentially a way to expand on who is being served, but then also what are they getting out of it? Like, what are the outcomes? So kind of digging into the application language, digging into what they're asking you, and then really also thinking about, am I answering their question, or am I just saying the thing that I know to be true for myself? Because also there's these questions of like, what do you do? Or what is your organization doing? And there are ways that we might describe ourselves in conversation or verbally that make sense. But sometimes we're not actually answering the question that is being asked, but we're actually just communicating. So making sure that if they're saying, do you serve LGBTQIA teens? You don't kind of do this roundabout thing about how you're open to the queer community. That's not answering the question. And this is all to say too, that like, I really like to try and recognize that a lot of these systems are really coming out of a very like normative, like white supremacist background, like funders, museums, organizations. It is coming from a very specific systematic place of evaluation and value systems. And so part of what is really complicated about this is that a lot of people who are doing like what we would classify as like the work, like the good work, may not have the ability or the training or whatever to frame themselves to match the language and systems of valuation that have been set up by these funders. And I think a lot of conversations are happening to try and like sort of guide ourselves into this more flexible understanding of like how we actually value something. And I would also encourage like this idea of talking to funders is really, really good, because them hearing your feedback is actually also really beneficial to them, and creating a system in which everyone is sort of co-creating opportunities so that funders aren't just dictating the need onto people, but are actually hearing what the need is and then reflecting the opportunities to suit those needs is going to be very beneficial for everybody in the long run. Another one like caveat I would say in applying for grants is that, you know, grants are long processes. If you need money in like a month, then you need to be looking specifically for a quick grant or an emergency grant. In most cases, other grants, you're looking at anywhere from 1 to 3 years. And so you kind of like rushing to do a grant is typically going to be a waste of time unless you're already someone who's producing a lot of grants. And like speaking with funders and like working on grants is actually a way of developing your business and essentially creating partnerships. So talking to a funder and saying like, hey, I want to do this archive project, and they're like, oh, that doesn't really suit this thing, but we have this other thing coming up. There's a lot of ways that those kinds of relationships develop and then it can actually guide you to funding. in other ways. Sometimes it's not just through applications. So after you've done all that like self-assessment, like, is this the thing I actually want to apply to? And you go through the process of doing your application. And then there's people who are sitting on the other end of these panels who are going to be looking at, you know, I don't know, 100 of what you just made. And if you think that reading your own application was boring, you know, imagine reading 100 of them. So it's kind of like really trying to understand and empathize with the toll that the bureaucracy is taking on all parties, and seeing that the people reading you need to like really be clear. You might be achieving like everything to the moon and back. You might be like feeding people and doing art shows and you know, saving animals, but it doesn't make sense to actually communicate all of those things. It makes the most sense to say to somebody, I want to show an art show of 2 painters who are queer because of this, and I am the best person to do this because, and these are the people who are going to get served because. And the person reading it will be like, great, this makes sense. So how can you kind of like really hone in on something that feels very resonant and very achievable and very clear, instead of trying to actually demonstrate all of the incredible things that you like possibly do? Because this isn't about the possibility. It feels like a lot of possibility when you're working on a proposal, but actually your proposal is saying, I want to do this thing. I'm going to do it whether or not you give me the money. This is a really amazing thing for you to have your name on. Like, you as the funder should be compelled and desire to support this thing. So I really recommend always like really zoning in, focus on one key aspect that suits the grant, and make it feel very clear and non-convoluted. Another thing that people are looking for in terms of like either work samples, whether or not you're explaining the work sample narratively, like we have done this, or you're actually submitting visual work samples or like press or whatever, is that you have achieved things similar to what you are proposing that you will achieve with this money. That doesn't mean that you have to have like made a public art piece to get a public art grant, but they want to know that when they give you $20,000, you will know what to do with $20,000, and that you will then be able to execute those things. So demonstrating your ability to organize something, even if it's not like specific to the project, if you wanted to do a really big exhibition, but one time you organized a really big like education thing, that example could actually be good to show if it shows your ability to execute scale. So like, what are you trying to show the funder that you were able to do in order to actually do your project? And then the person again is able to say, yes, this feels easy to say yes because this person looks like they know what they're doing. So also the same advice goes to don't show everything you've done, show the things that make you look good and make you look capable. Resonating a lot on what was said before me is these ideas around budget. I think people want to pretend like a budget is just like an auxiliary part of your application, but really it's the other half. And your budget needs to match your narrative. If you say that you're paying 10 artists, your budget needs to show that you're paying 10 artists. I work in an organization and that had been getting this grant over and over and over again, and they didn't get it one year. And like one of the critiques was, well, we see this artist name, but they're not in the actual budget. And those little kinds of things can sometimes be enough, especially if it's really competitive, where people are just like, this doesn't make sense. And so then they just pass on it, even though the project may have been funded 10 times before. So being able to reflect your budget and your narrative accurately, again, makes an easy yes. Because when we're talking about a grant reviewer, we're talking about people who want to give you the money, who want to feel excited about what you're saying, and who want to see what you're doing and see that it makes sense. No one is like coming into this process trying to say no. But there are a lot of people who apply. And so how can you make sure that your application is very clear, achievable, and concise from all these different aspects and angles. I think one other thing I'd like to add too is that, you know, we're talking a lot from like the organizational voice, but I also work with a lot of independent artists to do grants. And sometimes organizations can work with artists to get a grant that's only eligible for the artist. And then some of that money can actually go to fund an organizational project. If you are like starting a new project, you don't have like a lot of background or history, or if you're working with an artist who doesn't necessarily like have a mission statement or some of these like very formal ways of expression, I think that there's no reason to rule yourself out, but it's going to take a different type of angling. So, you know, you're not necessarily like solving something, but you are bringing something to the community, or, you know, you have to kind of figure out like what that angle means when you're not coming from a specific organizational voice that might already be very rooted and have its own strengths associated with it. And if you're new, particularly, I would kind of advise, like, if you have never done a version of the thing that you're proposing, even on like a very small scale, like I want to host mixers for like with this thing I did for art handlers who identify as queer, women, BIPOC. We want to host mixers to get them all together. We did that kind of just like on our own for a while before we tried to look for any funding, because we were able to then show like proof of concept. We could show that there are actually people interested, that this community exists in numbers, which, you know, that's the thing is like, if someone doesn't understand your concept, they will always understand numbers. So this is kind of this balance between budget and narrative. So if you're really, really new, I would not necessarily advise going straight into the grant world with a concept. But if you find someone who has some experience or has an organization, partnering is like one of the best ways to share resource and to bring ideas like into reality. And I guess too, I'll talk a little bit about unrestricted funds. So it's a website I started. It's, I guess, technically really a database, and I've been sort of just culling through grant opportunities, trying to locate ones that are specifically at least like over $1,000 with priority for unrestricted funding, meaning like cash in hand for artists without needing to prove anything. And that also are priorities for women, BIPOC, and queer and disabled artists and creatives. So I have like, I think over 70 opportunities currently listed there for a wide range of types of opportunity too. So it's a cool resource. I would like suggest anyone takes a look. And then I've been offering essentially grant writing services in relationship to the database. So if there are things that you want to do, but you don't have time, I work with people, and I've been working really on like a sliding scale or even sometimes pro bono basis as just part of my contributions to equity. And then eventually, hopefully, I'm hoping to actually start a fund also. So this is the cycle of fundraising and trying to like create more grassroots movement around fundraising and allow for individuals and a lot of different people to feel empowered to get money, because there's a lot of money and people need to give it away.
That was amazing, Kat. I feel like I learned a lot, so I'm really glad that we asked you to join, and I'm sure everybody learned a ton. And I think that a lot of the ways that you framed that were just really, really helpful. It almost reminded me of the tailoring your resume, right? Like you want to put stuff that even if you haven't done the specific thing, you say that you did some relevant things, but you don't put on the things that maybe they're old or they weren't so good.
Yeah, my barista resume, it was a separate.
Yeah, I think that was wonderful. Alrighty, so we can think that's also a good way to talk about the effective proposal, because I wrote a few notes about some of the things that you were saying that made me think about this. Because at the beginning, I think you were maybe alluding to this, Kat, but didn't come out and say it, that sometimes grant givers, whether it's a foundation or a government or whatever, sometimes they can be super progressive and they're like, oh, we want to fund like queer, BIPOC, land back, like really exciting stuff. But more often than not, they're going to be like, we want to fund a consultant. We don't actually care about the people who work for your institution because we don't think you know anything. Or, you know, we want to fund a lecture series or like a battle reenactment. It's like, well, those are nice, but is that really like what we need right now? So you have to sometimes convince people that the more progressive stuff that your institution is doing is not like trying to be trendy or whatever, that it's real quality work that is mission focused and important, and that yeah, there is a need for it in your community. Just like you said, with having these mixers, it was helpful to be like, yeah, we already had some and people liked them and they showed up and it was valuable. But then on the other hand, this is why I'm talking about sexy words right now, is that even if you're applying for a more progressive organization, then you can always look through projects, and you should always look through projects that they've already funded to see what kind of vibe you get from them. Even if they want to fund something and they use a lot of buzzwords like equity and stuff, like, I think we all know what equity is, so maybe that's not the best example, but sometimes these words that get tossed around a lot, like diversity and inclusion, we kind of all know what they mean, but we also need to really prove that we know what they mean, because if you're writing a grant, it's like, we're going to do this program and it's going to promote diversity. What does that really mean? Like, what are your action steps that are going to do that? And how do you evaluate that? So you got to throw in those words, because they're going to look for those words, especially if they were in their call for grants, but then you have a much better chance of getting the grant if you say, okay, I mean, again, it's like doing a job proposal or a resume. You see the things like they want somebody who's organized, they want somebody who knows how to use museum software, they want somebody who knows how to do budgets, and then you like sprinkle those things in your resume and cover letter and then explain how you've done them, why they mattered. So it's the same thing. And again, it's like, I really like what you said, Kat, about the money's out there and they want to give it to you. They're not really looking to say no. They're looking to say yes, just like when somebody's looking at a resume. So I think that's a really good parallel. You know that the thing is valuable and that you want to do, and you have to prove it to them. And you have to prove also that you can do it. And this is something I believe I mentioned in the first class. And I come from a small museum background, and I have had conversations with funders who were like, well, your organization's pretty small and you haven't done a publication before. But I can be like, yeah, but like I personally have been published. So like we know what we're doing, and we want to grow. So when you have those kind of conversations, whether or not you actually get to have them in person, but if you feel like maybe you're a smaller institution or a newer institution applying for something that you're going to be up against bigger or more established institutions, don't let them say no to you off the bat. You tell them why they should say yes. You got to justify your ask, just like anybody does. But I think it's especially important to be cognizant of your own maybe perceived weaknesses. Like, oh, especially like if your website isn't very good, they're going to be like, oh, well, then I don't know if we want to fund their exhibit because their website's like looks like it was made in 2004. I don't know if they're going to have a quality exhibit. You want to justify how you know you can do a good job with the money they're going to give you, which I think was something Cassandra mentioned before. But you can use those sexy words to call out that you are doing what they want you to do, but then make sure you define them. Otherwise, they're just buzzwords.
Yeah, I completely. I was just gonna say I completely agree with that. You know, I think that we, as people writing the grant, oftentimes we know what we're doing, right? We know that we can do it, but it's not just enough for us to know it. We have to make sure that they know it. And I think that's really kind of where we're getting with this, is like, make sure that it is very clear and you're being very specific about what you're doing, why you're doing it, who will benefit, and then sprinkle in those sexy words, and that ups your chances a lot.
Yeah, and this is one that I think I'll probably say on every of these grants classes. Demonstrate capacity, don't look needy. People want to back a winner. So I think especially when you're starting out writing grants, you can be like, oh, my institution doesn't have money, we want to hire local artists to do this, or something like that. And we really we're in a low-income neighborhood, and this would be such a great opportunity. Those things are all true, but you don't want to be holding your cap out there, be like, Lisa, can I have some grants? You actually want to show that you will, kind of like what Kat was saying, you're going to do the project whether you get the money or not. So you want to be like, this is where you want to give your money, because you're going to look really good if you give us the money. So yeah, back a winner. I think you can demonstrate need.
Oh, sorry.
Mm-hmm.
I was going to say the terms I like to lean on in this scenario is urgent and necessary.
So, right, because they'll often ask why now.
Yes. And so it's kind of this idea that something is urgent or it is necessary is coming from this place of you need to give us money, because it's difficult, because you are supposed to show need. Otherwise, why are they giving you money? But if you look needy, then they will be like, why don't you have your shit together?
Right,
so it's
exactly.
that fine line to walk. And so you have to be like, this is urgent. There is a need out there that I am addressing. And it is necessary work for you to be a part of. It's kind of more that framing.
Yeah, not begging, but showing why it's important. Yeah, that's great.
Right, and like Kat mentioned earlier, make sure that you answer what they're asking for. So follow directions is really important, because you may think you have answered the question, but all you did was restate what you stated somewhere else. And you didn't really answer the question, because like Kat said, sometimes the questions are so similar, but it might be a 1 or 2 word difference that means you need to expand and explain more fully. And so if you just kind of copy and paste, you haven't really explained, you haven't really expanded, you haven't really answered the question.
Definitely. And here's where headings can really come in handy, because sometimes there won't be an online form with different questions. They're going to say, okay, here's your narrative and it needs to have these components. And maybe they will say A, B, C, D, or 1 A, B, and then 2 A, B, and that sort of thing. And then you have to create your own Word document and put all that in. And then even if they don't ask you for those specific things, and obviously if they do, if they say question 1B, you better write question 1B before you write your answer. But even if they don't, if they say, okay, you have 5 pages to write your narrative, and you need to talk about who your program is going to serve, and how it's going to be sustainable after the grant period is over, and how you're going to evaluate the effectiveness, it's really helpful to put those questions as bold or underlined or something to divide the space in your 5-page narrative. Like Kat was saying, people are reading a lot of grant proposals, and they don't want to have to think harder than they need to. You want them to pay attention and give their attention and their time and their brain power to the substance of your grant, not trying to figure out how you've organized it.
Yeah, that's a really good point. When I review grants, I get very frustrated if I don't understand where the answer is to a specific question. And if I'm frustrated by trying to find an answer, it often makes it leaves a bad taste in the grant reviewer's mouth, because they're there to help you. They want to give you this money, like we've all said, but if you're making it really difficult for them to even understand what you've written, and they have 98 more to go, you might not get a high score because they couldn't find the answer. They stopped looking. They're like, I don't know where it is, move on to the next section. So it really is important.
Yeah. Well, I think we're ready to open up for some Q&A. We're doing okay on time. And if you have to peace out right now, just come back for Grant Writing 300 level. But you can feel free to unmute yourself and call out a question or type anything in the chat. Also, be sure to let us know what you want us to cover in upcoming classes, whether it's grant writing classes or if there are other subjects you would like us to offer little courses on. Anybody have any questions?
Thanks, Roberto. I see the clappy hands.
And just as a little heads up for the 400 level, we're going to be taking in advance a very small group of people who register in advance and want us to give them one-on-one time with a specific grant that they have written. So if there's something coming up that you know, the deadline is somewhat around the corner, these are going to be once a month. You know, start writing that. If you have something due end of May, that would be a good grant for us to review for you for the 400 level class. So keep that in mind. Oh, we got one question. Do you ever hire outside grant writers? I don't, because my museum is broke. And also, oh, sorry, I want to say one more thing. sorry. But you know, the other thing is too, I've been at my museum for 7 years, and I literally write grants and give tours of my museum in my sleep. And they are very accurate, and I tell children not to touch things in a very polite way. And, you know, so like I can write at this point a lot of these grants while I'm like making coffee. I can dictate it into my phone. You know, if you really know your stuff and you are a fast writer, you, even if you have the budget in your institution, maybe hiring a grant writer isn't the thing you need. Maybe you need like a bookkeeper or somebody to help with the budgets or something else. But I think having a grant writer, if I was in a bigger institution, would be amazing. However, that's like, you know, because I'm the director, I have to do a lot of different hats. That's a hat I personally would keep for myself because I'm a very fast writer. Yeah, Kat, I'm sorry, I cut you off.
Oh, it's okay. I mean, I was gonna say, I definitely recommend, if you can't hire a grant writer, and not that everyone needs to, but that you at least have probably at least 2 people who copy edit or read your proposal beforehand. The likelihood that you stop making sense, because the whole thing can be very dizzying. You know, it's just like sometimes having those outside eyes and they're like, what do you mean here? Like, oh my God, I thought that was so clear. And so it's just, even if it is a friend or your mom, like whoever it is, it's always good to have a couple people read it.
Totally. Yeah, you're like, I think we've all kind of said this in different ways. You know it so well, and it's like in your head.
Yeah.
And yeah, maybe you didn't actually explain it very well to an outside person.
Yeah, I'll just add, we don't hire outside grant writers only because that's my job. So we don't need to. But before I came on, they did not have a grant writer. So they did see the need for one. They just decided to make it a permanent position instead of like continuing to hire, you know, outside people. Once they demonstrated the need was there, they felt it was more beneficial for them just to have someone on staff that's their job. And I don't think that our organization would probably revert and go back and hire grant writers on like a case-by-case basis. I think they really want somebody there to handle it, because not only do I write the grants, I also manage all of the grants. So there's also that aspect too. And I think what might be helpful for people to hire more than a grant writer, like if you're skilled at writing, you might not need a grant writer, but you might need somebody to help you manage the whole process once you've got it.
Yeah, that's great. That actually kind of leads us into the subject for our 300 class, right? Because we were going to talk about grant seeking, and I think the 500 class is going to be that whole process. Yeah. So definitely stay tuned for that. We did have a question about recommendations for finding grants, and I see that Kat has dropped some in the chat, which are all really good. And we're going to talk more about grant seeking in the 300 level class as well. So definitely stay tuned for that.
Yeah, and it's a little complicated because it's really dependent on where you live. Like you'll see my database is very California focused. I mean, I'm putting more and more, but it's a lot of there's a lot of local grants, which are the best ones to go after.
Yeah, the turnaround time is also a lot faster on those local ones.
Yeah, and the local ones, you know, if you can demonstrate your idea, your concept in a clear, concise manner, and you can make the grantor understand why this is necessary, you know, you're more likely to get them because they live in your community and they work in your community and they want to see your community prosper. So applying to these local grants is a great way to kind of start out if you've never done grant writing before, because you know your community and you know the people in it. And it's a lot easier to get feedback and data from your local community.
Right, and that justifying of what your project is, you're going to have to do a little bit less for a local place because people are going to know if you're in a high needs area for economically disadvantaged people, or if you're in a area that has a lot of Bengali speakers or Hmong speakers or Spanish speakers, or some large immigrant population. They're already going to know that, so you don't have to explain it.
Exactly.
Right. Oh, cool. This is exciting. We are really pretty good on time. Just 2 minutes over. Nice job.
I just
if anybody
wanted to know. Excuse me. I just wanted to know when, if you know yet, when the next meeting will be.
We haven't nailed down a specific day, but we do try to do them on the same time, so 8 p.m. Eastern on Thursdays. It'll be probably just about a month from now. Might be the week before or the week after. But yeah, we'll announce that real soon. Yeah, thank you.
Okay.
Alrighty. Any last thoughts?
There's a lot on Instagram. There's a lot of like Instagram accounts that are just doing this now too, like grant opportunity postings.
That's true. Yeah, especially the real like hyper local stuff, which can be also good for the quick grant. So they'll make sure that your institutional budget fits those quick grants.
Yes.
At least I think probably for California, I would imagine this is similar, but I'm in New York City and we have a state organization that offers quick grants, but my institution's budget is higher because it's in New York City and because we're committed to giving benefits and proper wages. So I spoke to them and I was like, hey, what we pay as a proper wage in New York City would be like a huge fortune in some, bumbly town in upstate New York, which I can say because I went to undergrad there. It's like a lot of cows. And the property values are not so expensive. Cost of living is much cheaper. So really, if you did like a scale, I would think that my low budget organization would fall under their category, and I told them all that and they're like, oh, that's a good point. We'll take it to the board. And then they're like, no, we're just going to stick to the budget number. I'm like, all right, well, that's life. But yeah, definitely look at those things before you apply. Make sure that you can apply. All righty. Well, I'm gonna say we can all go have a cup of tea and start winding down for the evening. Or those of you on the East Coast or the West Coast, maybe have some dinner. Thanks again for spending your Thursday night with us. And thank you so much, Kat, for your part of the presentation. It was really wonderful. I'm really happy that we connected with you. And again, everybody check out Kat's website, unrestrictedfunds.com. And hope to see you at Grant Writing 300.
Thanks, y'all.
Everyone.